Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I'm your host, Dusty O'Connell. You can check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/NorseCode or throw a few bucks in the tip jar at paypal.me/NorseCode. And with me, as per usual, is Minnesota Vikings blogger extraordinaire and now a veteran of at least one London NFL football game, Arif Hassan. How you doing, Arif?
Good. How are you?
I am well. The heartburn from that delicious pasty we ate at halftime has subsided. Several days. Well, see, my real mistake was after the game, washing it down with a cup of coffee. But it was delicious. I really lament the lack of hand pie culture in America now. I didn't realize how much we were missing out on.
I totally agree. It would be really nice, actually, to, grab a hand pie in the middle of a game. I mean, I don't know. It's, perfect. It's, much better than I think, all these loose sandwiches that we have where, fillings can, fly out everywhere. Always worried about, the ketchup in the hot dog, dripping somewhere.
Oh, yeah.
It feels like it sounds bigger problem with the hand pie.
Come on, man. Hot dogs are, the worst possible stadium food, and yet they are an integral part of our tailgating culture. Regrettably.
UK figured it out. I think they did it right.
So, last time we were here, we weren't even here. We were in London, and we had gotten through half of the game before we discovered that not only was Eric Thompson not coming to join us, but it wouldn't have mattered if he had, because the pub was closing up around us. I think they were a bit miffed at our boisterousness and chose not to leave us be.
I'd like to say it's we got kicked out, but really, I mean, the pub just closes. I don't really get it. A lot of places in London close a lot earlier than I would expect. A ton of places close at 5. I don't know, when people get to do stuff. When they get off work, half the places are closed.
Well, so what struck me was, I was staying in Southend-on-Sea, which is on the eastern edge of the island of England. And Friday and Saturday night, it's popping. They do fireworks every Saturday night. And then people of all ages stay out super late. The bars stay open. Some of them stay open until 3 a.m. But if it's not Friday or Saturday night, then everywhere except for one restaurant is asleep by 9 o'clock.
Yeah, it's so weird. And it's true in London too that there aren't many places open till 2, open till 3 or whatever, and I'm super used to, even in Minneapolis where there's just not a ton of stuff open late at night. This is a problem, as you can imagine. It impacts me a lot because I'm up at 3 a.m. and I've got nothing to do, and no places are open. But even in Minneapolis I've kind of figured things out, and I figured a city like London would be one of those mythical cities that never sleep where there's things to do. And most pubs are closed. Most restaurants are closed earlier than you'd expect. And this pub was no exception. It closed at 11, and I was just surprised. To me, you could do it a lot of places in the United States do it where the kitchen closes at 11, and drinks continue to run on into the night or whatever. But nope, everything closes.
Even New York, they say it's a city that never sleeps, but it sleeps. I've been in Manhattan at 4 a.m. looking for food, and it's not as plentiful as maybe Broadway and Hollywood would have you believe.
It's all lies. Propaganda.
So, on to the game. In classic Norse code fashion, we were looking for betting opportunities and didn't realize that the second half was starting. And we did not find any betting opportunities. And we only missed maybe a minute and a half of game time. But that was enough for us to miss a Browns fumble, the kickoff, a Browns fumble, and a Vikings field goal. We came out of the tunnel and we were wait, what? The score's different.
Yeah, I think part of it was that we just had a lot of, hubris about the amount of time a halftime would be. Because, we were going pretty lackadaisically throughout, trying to catch the sights or whatever. And so we mistimed our return pretty quickly. Not a ton, but it was quick enough for, I guess, a score, because we got back to our seats and we were wait, the score is wrong. Like, and like, the Vikings were about to kick off, and I was like, but Vikings were about to kick off, so clearly it's the beginning of the half. We didn't miss anything. This is literally my first thought. I saw the Vikings lining up to kick off, and I was like, oh yeah, didn't miss anything. Perfect timing.
Yeah, just in time. Oh wait, there's 3 extra points on the board. And to be fair, I watched the recap of the game, and it all happened very, very fast. Like, Crowell fumbled on literally the first play of the second half. And then we had just like one of the quickest 3 and outs we had all game, but we were still close enough for a Kai Forbath field goal. So a lot can happen in a minute 30 in a
I'm sure if
game.
I had watched that, I would have felt like it was a wasted opportunity. Like, oh man, they really could have gotten a touchdown with such great field position because they were, according to the play-by-play, on the Cleveland 30. Come on, guys. But
Well, it was a
having
hard
not
fought.
watched it, I don't really feel that upset.
Yeah, all things being equal. So the Browns get the ball back, and then Matthew Days makes one of his 2 contributions to the offense that day with a 71-yard kickoff return.
It's kind of one of those rare, I guess, failures of the Viking special teams unit. In this case, you saw tight end Blake Bell, former quarterback Blake Bell, kind of screw up a little bit. You saw Tremaine Brock screw up in a big way on that kickoff return, and it really set up the Browns for pretty good field position, which thankfully they didn't do anything with. Which like that's fine. The Vikings didn't really put. Vikings defense did a pretty good job, since then. I mean, they allowed a 13-yard run, but then they kind of just stuffed the Browns 1 yard incomplete, and then a field goal. And so, they didn't really, force a difficult kicking situation. It was just kind of, I guess, a little bit lucky that the Vikings didn't give up that score. I was talking to a couple of people after the game, and I was reading a couple of recaps, and they were talking about how, this was kind of the moment that like the Vikings' fortunes turned, which is kind of convenient, right? Because that happened at the very beginning of the half. The Vikings were very good in the second half. I really don't think that's the case. I think the Vikings got pretty lucky early on. They got that field goal and that fumble. I don't think that if you were to say that there was a turning point or momentum, it had happened at that fumble because that 71-yard, run was pretty good. I don't think it happened at that missed field goal because the Vikings had to punt on the drive afterwards. And obviously it didn't happen on the drive following because the Browns scored on a 23-yard field goal. It took a while for the Vikings actually to kind of get going. I don't think until probably halfway through, maybe even later, the third quarter.
Yeah, you could argue that it was later. I mean, the biggest stop and like the way that we kept ourselves in the game was about 5.5 minutes left in the third. Cleveland marches downfield mostly, but we are able to stop them in the red zone, basically. And part of that was good fortune, but part of it was the defense doing a very effective job of bottling up the passing game from Deshaun Kaiser. He was either forced to make inaccurate throws or scramble away because Harry Smith was appearing out of the second level with remarkable speed on like every play.
Yeah, really good play from Harrison Smith, I think, in that third quarter drive, or in that third quarter section of the game, and especially on that drive, did a good job shutting down a lot of running lanes. Ends up with, I think on that drive alone, 2 or 3 tackles. The only issue is that drive also had a couple of penalties, one on Shamar Stephen for a face mask, the other one Xavier Rhodes for no legal use of hands, which is kind of, I'm not going to say it's an unusual penalty for a cornerback, but, out of all the penalties that Xavier Rhodes gets, not really one of them that you think about that much. But they were able to sort of tighten up as soon as the Browns got inside the 10. Great tackle by Anthony Barr, and a couple of incomplete passes forced by, I think, Terrence Newman and I want to say Anthony Barr again in coverage, and that forced a field goal. And that is probably, on a drive like that where the Browns were able to move that far downfield as a result of penalties, their ability to prevent the touchdown really allowed the Vikings to kind of take hold of the lead, as it were, on the following drive.
Yeah, with we started out. Marcus Sherrills had a decent return, and then I guess Latavius Murray made a brief appearance as midfield back. I don't know if Jarek was just tired from running all over the field, but so he gets a few carries. And then on the other side of midfield, Case Keenum, as was kind of the case for most of the game, had two receivers open at different points in his progression and gave them both up to throw towards Adam Thielen in the end zone who was, pretty heavily covered. There were four hands there, and two of them were not Viking hands. However, it worked out fine because the defender got called for pass interference, and that led to a first down at the 1 yard line. Thanks, officials.
Yeah. It was pretty weird. I think that this is a pretty good example of a game that demonstrates best why, Case Keenum is not like a long-term solution at quarterback. I feel like he's kind of skating by. This is another good example of how, he keeps on passing up these missed opportunities. We mentioned in the previous podcast in the first half, how he turned down just a wide open, deep Stephon Diggs, again for Adam Thielen. And in this case, his propensity to ignore, open players this once again in favor of Adam Thielen, nearly hurt the Vikings were it not for that pass interference call. It did allow, Jerick McKinnon to get a goal line touchdown, which I think is hilarious. And on the 2-point conversion, he also got the ball, was able to grab the 2-point conversion. And in that one, he kind of powered through a guy. He kind of didn't need to because by the time he made contact, he was already across the goal line. But, it was nice to see, right, that he was able to just power through a linebacker, get additional yards if he had needed to in that case. I think it's demonstrative of a couple of things. The first is that, like I said, Keenum misses opportunities. The second, that, McKinnon is really capable of doing kind of a lot more than people give him credit for. And the third thing is that the Vikings are kind of always in it, in part because of how the defense is playing, but also in part because, earlier in that drive, there's a 25-yard pass to Adam Thielen that was, really authored in part authored mostly by Adam Thielen just cracking open.
My favorite part, other than the score and the successful 2-point conversion, I definitely got a kick out of Jerick driving his car from the right-hand side.
Yeah,
that was
so funny.
A tip of the cap to the fans in the stands. So we're in the fourth quarter, and Case Keenum, under pressure, completes to who else but Adam Thielen. And that, along with a roughing the passer penalty for driving Keenum into the ground, which I had to explain to someone in our party why an otherwise legal tackle is not legal if you do it too hard. That gets us across midfield, and then we get another defensive pass interference call that puts us at the 20 with about 11 minutes to go. And then the BBC catches a holding call on the very next play. So without really generating any offense, we find ourselves on the 5-yard line again. Thanks, officials.
I want to clarify that the BBC is a reference to Brian Body Calhoun and not the British Broadcasting Corporation. A somewhat easier
BBC
mistake
7.
To make.
No.
But yeah, it was like, 30 yards, I think. And it's kind of kind of sucks because Stephon Diggs only ended up with 27 yards in this game. And I think we both kind of had predicted that Stephon Diggs wouldn't be doing as hot in this game. Coming off an injury, he seems to be kind of more susceptible to injury limiting his play. But it would have been nice to get that 30 yards into the stat sheet because he'd have 57 instead of 27 for the game. But again, it does put, like you said, the Vikings within scoring distance. And then you have a couple of other penalties, I think, on that drive. So you had the roughing the pass, and there's also defensive holding on that drive. But yeah, Kyle Rudolph was a big part of the drive. I kept on getting tweets about Kyle Rudolph because of that weird incident with athletic tight ends and the whole thing. And Rudolph did mostly what he was supposed to do. So the Vikings were able to kind of put the game away at the top of the fourth, and it was kind of impossible for the Browns to catch up.
It's true. A stunning display of athleticism from Kyle Rudolph, managing to get his toes down in the very back of the end zone. Pretty much puts away the game, 30-16. Well, it puts away the game in retrospect, but to me, that looked like the perfect sort of score that the Vikings could just bungle away and have in past years. Although, against the Browns, particularly, our defense was playing so well that was unlikely to happen.
Yeah, I think so. And also, just generally speaking, it feels like it's happened significantly less often since Mike Zimmer took over. It really felt like the Vikings. I think because the year previous, the Vikings were like famously giving up leads. Like they had, the best first quarter differential in a loss or something like that. And one of the only games that they ended up winning was when they put 28 points in the Cardinals in the first quarter and then managed to not piss it away the entire time. I think the Lions have the record comeback against the Vikings from that year. It was like a 26-point deficit. They took it to overtime. Very next year, the Vikings were much better at closing down games. Just in general under Zimmer, that's been the case. And, Everson Griffin mentioned after this game, this is the best group of guys, he thinks he's ever played with. And the defense's ability to kind of shut things down, late in games when like stuff like this is on the line is really demonstrative of that. Like it really kind of shows that, for the first time I felt kind of comfortable with a 2-score lead. Part of that again has to do with the Browns, but I think part of it just has to do with the defense just generally giving, I think, fans a bit more faith in what they have the ability to do.
So we're getting towards the end of the game. There's about 3 minutes left, and the Browns decide to go for it on 4th down from pretty deep in their own territory. They were on like their own 35, I think. And I think you and I like looked at each other and we're like, really? They're going for it? Like, what in this game made Hugh Jackson think that they would have a shot at scoring, getting the ball back, and scoring again?
Yeah, I mean, I guess part of it was just like the game is lost, but like that doesn't mean give up. I guess like it's,
you played to win the game. Yeah.
Yeah. That ended up. It's kind of funny that decision to go for it ended up resulting in Everson Griffin finally continuing the streak. Griffin finally gets his sack after Harry Smith strikes again like a laser beam fired from the sky and misses his tackle, but that slows down Kaiser enough for Griffin to get his lunch, and that ties the longest Vikings sack streak. Right, 8's the limit. Right. I thought it had beaten. I think last week it tied it. And this week he set the record. I'm not sure. Either way, Jim Marshall, 1969, pretty good company to be in.
Right. He is on pace to reach his preseason goal of 20 sacks, which who does that?
That is wild.
that is so wild. So we get the ball back.
What's really funny about this sack, though, is that it came at like the second to last drive, essentially at the very last minute of the game. The Vikings media were like, "Were you worried that you weren't going to get it?" And he was like, "Yeah, I guess." But then Harry helped me out by missing. But what's kind of wild about this is that and a lot of times when you take a look at these kinds of streaks, especially for a statistic as fluky as sacks, stuff happens where a player gets a sack and is quiet for the rest of the game, and you're like, well, I mean, I guess in the sense that he deserved the sack, sure, he deserves the sack, but he's not like he played well for like 8 consecutive games or whatever. But in this case, Griffin was getting a ton of pressure and fighting through double and triple teams in order to get that pressure, and you still like impacting the play, forcing Watson to scramble. They ended up trying to run read option at him, running screens to his side in order to neutralize him. But he got a ton of pressure in that game. No matter who you ask, Football Outsiders, PFF, Stats Inc., NFL.com, they all have like their own like stat organizations. ESPN has their own now too. But he was getting a ton of pressure in the game, and it just happened to be the case that he wasn't getting a sack. And so it could have been like a fluke in the other direction where he didn't happen to get a sack in one of his best performing games. But yeah, no, he ended up getting a sack at the very end. So hopefully, the streak will continue because it'd be really cool for Griffin to be able to add to the insane pantheon of pass rushers the Vikings have had in their history.
Well, and I think that speaks to kind of the larger story of the game is that DeShone Kizer wasn't really able to do very much. He finished the game 18 on 34 for 179 yards and 3 sacks for a QBR of 33.3, which I understand is not very good.
Well, yeah, I would argue that that's not very good. What's interesting is that I think before the final 2 drives, he was something like 12 of 29 or 28 or something like that. Like he was doing really awfully until garbage time, and he didn't even take full advantage of garbage time, kind of like Tyrod Taylor did on Thursday. Well, he couldn't even do anything with that. So yeah, I mean, Kaiser's had a pretty difficult year. it would have been very frustrating if the Vikings weren't able to shut down on him, and it was kind of annoying that on some of the designed runs he was able to get some yardage. But yeah, for the most part, I mean, the Vikings did their job as a top tier defense against a struggling quarterback who, on 34 attempts couldn't even crack 200 yards.
Yeah, and we really spread it around pressure-wise. I mean, Eric Kendricks with 9 tackles, Harry Smith with 7 tackles and 1 for a loss, Anthony Barr with 4 tackles, Everson Griffin only with 1 tackle, but 5 quarterback hits. So the pressure existed. Our defense played to form and really bottled up the Cleveland offense. And I mean, I'd like to think that we still would have won had we not been gifted half the field once and then turned it into 8 points. But you take what you can get, I guess. I'm certainly not going to complain. And that was the game. It was a lot of fun. I would love to return to London to see them play a team who is not Jacksonville or Cleveland one day, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, evidently so I was talking to a couple of people there, even neutrals. They were telling me that probably since 2007 when they restarted the international series, the Vikings-Steelers game was the best game that they had played in London. And if not the best, one of the best. I think maybe there was like a Patriots-Dolphins game that was supposed to be pretty good too. But that one's not as recent, so people don't remember it as well. But yeah, it'd be pretty cool if, in a couple of years, the Vikings take on, a competitive team and put them away.
Well, we'll just have to do it in America instead.
Shucks.
Nah, dang it. Let's we got a short little mailbag here. Logan Reed writes in via the email, which you can submit questions, comments, concerns, or otherwise to norsecodepodcast@gmail.com.
Have we ever had a concern submitted to us? I don't think we have.
Yeah, we've had a couple. Like, where's your podcast on iTunes kind of things.
Oh, yeah, okay, fair.
Josh Gordon's agent claims he's in the best shape of his life. Your thoughts?
I mean, what would you expect him to say? Also, hey, man, if he's off substances, maybe that is the case. Who knows?
Josh Gordon is more strung out than he's ever been, but he's hungry to play because he hasn't eaten in days. That's not how you keep your agent. Kenneth Allen at ADEF Description on Twitter writes in, who is Teddy going to replace on the roster? Do you cut a receiver, put someone on IR?
Yeah, I think you put Sam Bradford on IR. I would have said cut a receiver, but they did. They cut Rodney Adams to put Mac Brown on the roster. And I think they kind of just want to stick with the 3 running backs and the fullback thing, just because, it's good to have depth. And if one goes down in the game, you don't want to rely on your fullback and cut out, that portion of your playbook where you have a fullback playing fullback. So they'll probably keep Mac Brown. But, you could see Mac Brown getting cut, but I think most likely you'll see Sam Bradford go to injured reserve in order to preserve that roster spot. You could, I suppose, see Kyle Sluter hit waivers. That would be pretty uncomfortable for the Vikings, given sort of the competition that existed for Sluter. But nobody claimed him off of waivers last time, and he was able to choose his team based off of practice squad contracts. The Vikings were able to just promote him from there and give him a regular contract. But I think with an additional set of quarterback injuries hitting the league, with Luck going to IR and Deshaun Watson going to IR, maybe there's a little bit more room for Kyle Sluter to make a roster. So I feel like they'd be uncomfortable with that.
Yeah, I feel like Bradford to IR preserves all the options for next season and gives a little bit more flexibility in terms of, getting something back for one of these guys instead of just cutting them.
Yeah.
Alex Goebel writes in, given the recent performances of both Trey Waynes and Mackenzie Alexander, would you call the trade for Tremaine Brock a mistake?
Trey Waynes had a really good game. I still think he's not having a good season, so I wouldn't say the recent performances of Trey Waynes would kind of reorient your understanding of the Tremaine Brock trade. Mackenzie Alexander's been playing really well, but we should also kind of understand that, it is still weird that we don't have a solid nickel corner spot picked out. Terrence Newman is still rotating with him, and so Mackenzie Alexander is like clearly not like earned the spot in a traditional sense, despite what it looks like to be, really solid play from him, because he's just not getting targeted that much. He's not receiving that many. He's not giving up that many yards and stuff like that, which is like fine. But like Newman is still playing like a bunch of those snaps, and so my sense is that the Vikings would prefer Newman, but they just want to keep Newman fresh. And if that's the case, it's fine having depth, and it's fine having Tremaine Brock on the roster. It is kind of frustrating that Brock isn't playing well either as a special teamer. He's playing awfully as a special teamer, or in the brief moments that he had at cornerback. But I'm still worried about depth for the team, so I'm probably mostly fine with the move still.
Yeah, I wouldn't really call it an embarrassment of riches. What's like one less than that? An embarrassment of comfort?
Yeah.
I feel like that's kind of where we're at. Because, yeah, Wayne's had a couple of great plays on Sunday, and so did Newman. Newman almost had a pick deep in Cleveland territory. And, like you said, Alexander has acquitted himself pretty well this season. I think having three pretty good guys to rotate through, especially when, you've got somebody as like old and decrepit as Terrence Newman.
Decrepit.
Is not a mistake. Jacob Coast writes in, early-ish predictions for how the AFC playoffs will pan out. Are the Vikings going to meet the Chiefs in the long-awaited Super Bowl IV rematch?
That would be pretty cool, honestly. I still believe in the Chiefs, even after like a couple of shaky performances. And it would just be way cooler if the Chiefs did it than if the Patriots did it like a 50th time. So yeah, I don't really have a ton of faith in the Steelers, although they've gotten better in the past couple of weeks. I don't really expect, Jacksonville's resurgence to like climb quite that far. So yeah, I guess the AFC team that I'd pick is probably the Chiefs, because I don't really see another AFC team being all that interesting. Now, if Buffalo had really kind of like turned the screws on the Jets this Thursday, I think we'd actually be talking about them a lot more. But they are a wild card team, and so you can't just pick them. I don't think the Raiders have it. The Broncos, like unless Paxton Lynch returns from his shoulder injury and just balls out and like really secures that second wild card spot, but is like secretly a better team than the record, I don't really see another team besides the Chiefs being interesting, especially with the Patriots having such a bad defense.
Yeah, it's funny because like the Steelers, the Chiefs, and the Patriots are like a rock, paper, scissors game. Like each team is perfectly well equipped to beat one of the other two.
Yeah.
And I mean, I feel like injury might be decisive in that monster. I mean, if Le'Veon Bell or Antonio Brown miss any significant time, that's pretty much it for the Steelers. I feel like it would be cool to see the Chiefs go deep, because I would like to see Kareem Hunt potentially win Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, it'd be good for the brand in Norse code.
It'd be good for your fantasy team too, if I recall correctly.
It would not suck.
you could use some help if I recall correctly. At least you're not like stomping everybody in points this year. Like at least your losses have been relatively fairly earned.
They've been earned. I think all but one. And if you have like one unfair loss in fantasy, you can't really complain about it. It's fine.
Don from Ohio. What possible explanation could either of you have for skipping out on tailgating before the game last Sunday? Well, the logistics of like trying to bring a backpack full of stuff into an NFL game, even in London, are complicated. Especially when you don't just have a vehicle that you can like deposit at the stadium, or like on a side street that is literally right next to the stadium.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So I posted a couple of pictures of the stadium and like the surrounding environs, but it really is weird. It's like if you took one of the stereotypical cottages from like one of those Disney sub-theme parks, where it's like, yeah, look where, Belle from Beauty and the Beast grew up. Like it looks exactly like that French village, where like the homes look like they're just updated versions of the 17th century homes, and they just friggin' dropped a rugby stadium in the middle of it.
Yeah, you cross like one like residential street and there's the stadium.
Yeah. It's just like wild. And the thing is, I suspect on like normal days where the train doesn't break, it's actually not an enormous transportation issue, because I feel like London has kind of reached equilibrium where it takes just as long to get somewhere by metro as it does by car.
Well,
And so
we did
a lot of
both, and
people
I
will
think
take
we
the metro.
discovered that yes, it does.
Yeah. It's so weird. But yeah, the you'd think with like all of these small streets that this would create like just this enormous, it's like an 80,000 person stadium. But like it's mostly fine. I mean, there's obviously like traffic, but I mean, I've seen worse traffic at NFL games in the United States with like tons of streets and like highways kind of almost purpose built for some stadiums and stuff like that. And this time it was just like, yeah, here's a cottage, here's another cottage, here's a stadium, and then here's a cottage, here's a cottage.
Well, so, and it was an interesting like culture shock moment for me because like so the stadium has like a parking lot around it. And I don't know if it's this way for rugby matches, but that parking lot was almost completely used by like tailgate type stuff. Like food booths and a giant screen that was running all the like morning games at 6 p.m.
That was really cool. I kind of wanted to stick around, but we had to record.
Yeah.
And it was getting a little chilly.
It was getting a little chilly, and there were a lot of people just like standing in a parking lot. But yeah, all football, like all NFL football in London is primetime, which is pretty great. Unless it's like crazy late at night, which is also
unless it's
fine.
like primetime football here, in which case it's just nope.
I would be okay with a football game starting at 2 a.m. I imagine you would probably not have a problem with that either, but that's...
I would somehow manage, having just complained about not having anything to do at 3 a.m. when I'm up.
But so all the like lot space at the stadium is taken up by like tailgate and shuttle buses and things that take you to various parts of London, and everybody just sort of like parks their car in a neighborhood far away or doesn't. It seems like not very many people drive, whereas like whatever they're calling the stadium in Denver now, it's just Mile High, I guess now. It's Sports Authority at Mile High, even though Sports Authority isn't a thing anymore. The stadium is surrounded by elevated highways. It is literally in the middle of a concrete desert. It would take you probably half an hour just to walk out of the space that was only parking lot, and then there would be nowhere for you to go. There's no bus stop. There's no housing. It's just like you're basically trapped there unless you have a personal vehicle or a taxi to get out. And here, you just walk through neighborhoods to get to the train station, which unfortunately was closed. There was apparently like a maintenance issue with the trains, and so there was this like crush of probably 1,000 people waiting to get on the train. But what ends up happening is people set up, like as you're leaving between the stadium and the train station, people set up food trucks in their driveways.
It is super cool.
It's
I would
amazing.
imagine if you're like not into it and you lived near there, it would like suck a ton. But that's like I guess it's 2 weeks a year now for them. But like it's like it doesn't happen that often. It was super cool as an experience on my end, which that's obviously the most important thing because I'm the protagonist of reality. And it was we had like some like street. We saw like the dude with the burning bagpipe.
Yeah,
that was dope as hell.
His bagpipes had candles on the end of the pipes, and like I mean, even if you don't like sports, just perfect your pasty recipe and go out and make a little money as all these people are like walking by your house.
It was kind of cool because we saw like what was like clearly like a fly by night mom and pop. I kind of live here, shop right next to like this like group that like professionally caters and decided to do a thing to like advertise their professional catering services, sell some, food like as people were like leaving. By the way, let's talk about how absolutely wonderful Rob Gronkowski was.
Oh, we didn't already talk about the nicest Patriots fan in the universe?
Oh, we might have. Yeah.
I feel like we opened the show with him last time. He was if we had not, and that was another reason we missed the stupid tailgate, was I purchased our tickets on StubHub at a pretty reasonable discount, and regrettably that involved walking not to Twickenham Stadium proper, but the stadium like a quarter mile away called Twickenham Stoop. And
yeah, I'm so glad that he was like, no, Twickenham Stoop is different. You have to go. And we had to take a direction that the rest of the crowd wasn't going, which is like a supremely uncomfortable experience.
it's true. We were there was like a pedestrian overpass involved, and we were definitely swimming upstream.
We were like, are we sure we have to go this way? And like the guy told me, two of the people that we asked along the way told me, Gronk told us, Google Maps is telling me, and I'm still like, I don't know if this is the way we should go, guys.
Well, and my email told us to, like, hey, it's over here. But like, if we hadn't had to go to Twickenham Stoop and wait in a long queue, as is the British way, he probably would have escorted us to our seats. He was
great.
He was the nicest man. But that was
another reason that we missed the tailgate is because the will call was in another stadium.
The princess is in another castle. Terribly sorry.
Damn it, Bowser.
But that was like another element of the culture shock to me, is you were talking about this like fly by night operation in someone's driveway. I think it's only fly by night in America. Like I think you're just allowed to set up, like if you can cook and you have like a large enough portable kitchen, I think you're just allowed to like make food and serve it to people without having to pay, 5 figures for a license for your tiny truck and going through the whole inspection process and all the nonsense that you're expected to go through in America, because it turns out that the farmers that grow most of our proteins do it in a way that it's unhealthy for us to eat them unadulterated. Did you know we're like the only country in the world that refrigerates our eggs?
There's a whole thing about that, because we're also the only country that washes the outside of the eggs and that gets rid of the waxy coating that helps protect the eggs. So you have to refrigerate them because the eggs are washed. And so the surface of the eggs in the United States are actually cleaner than the surface of the eggs anywhere else. It's a whole different thing. It's not because the egg production in the United States is like bad or wrong or like GM. It's because we wash the eggs.
Why do we?
It's totally different. It has nothing to do with that.
Why do we?
How
wash
did
the
licensing
eggs? Why are
turn
eggs
into
so
a thing
dirty? Why do we
about
have to wash
American
them?
like agricultural practices, man? We're talking about Twickenham.
All right.
It is food related, so it is on brand. But
so that's our explanation for missing the tail. But and also like a lot of people, like British people, were unprepared for the NFL clear bag rule.
Yeah,
which was unfortunate. I mean, we had to so our strategy was to like drop the recording gear and excess clothing and stuff off at your hotel and then bring just very minimal stuff into the stadium, because we are aware like what it's like going to an NFL game. Many people who live nearby were not.
Yeah, they were not happy to find out these things. So what was nice about this game versus a game earlier in the year is that at this point, a lot of the fans who had already been to a game had gotten used to it. But, some fans were like Vikings fans, and so they were going to go to this game. And so they just kind of found out at the stadium, which is just so frustrating. And the reason this is like a thing is because this is the first year the NFL has actually enforced the NFL security procedures in London. And, in previous years, it was just kind of like whatever the security procedures for those stadiums were for Wembley and more recently for Twickenham. But now the NFL is enforcing its security procedures in general in London games. And so, a lot of fans were, I guess, particularly surprised. I think it was week 4 with that first game. But, fans were surprised now if this was the first London game that they went to.
Don from Ohio also writes, is James the Browns or 49ers of fantasy football?
I like to think the 49ers. I don't think James is like organizationally broken from top down, but I think there are systemic problems in what he does.
No, I would agree with that. There have been no trade controversies, as far as I know, surrounding James and a failure to fax. Or wait, no, that was almost Elvis Dumervil. He, as commissioner, he has not failed to inform himself of a trade.
Right.
And if he had, that would be the Brownsiest thing that could possibly happen, and that would make him the Browns. But no, I tend to agree. 49ers. Final question. What dream trade would you have done if you could have done it before the deadline for the Vikings?
Well, that's interesting. I actually was having this sort of a related question with someone, a member of Draft Twitter, earlier today. Because they're like, what do you think the Vikings draft needs are? And I'm like, well, the Vikings aren't perfect, but their needs are, like I don't quite have a full accounting of like what they need. Obviously, hey, it'd be cool to have a second safety, but like Sendejo's doing pretty well. It'd be cool to have, a better cornerback, but like Trey Waynes is, he's not doing well. He's difficult to figure out. But a trade for Trey Waynes would be like an overreaction, especially after a really good game. So like, I don't know, for like a 3 technique, who is giving up 3 techniques? I don't know. So yeah, I don't know what my answer to that would be, because it's the only teams that have like a glut of defensive linemen are teams that have gone out of their way to have a glut of defensive linemen. So they're not giving any of them up. And in fact, they very recently acquired more. The Seattle Seahawks traded for Sheldon Richardson, and the Jacksonville Jaguars traded for Marcel Darius when they both had pretty good defensive linemen already. Who would the Vikings trade for? If the Bills, had a fire sale, it would have been kind of cool to get Kyle Williams, I guess. To play the Shreve Floyd Tom Johnson role, that would have really helped things. But he's not, the person he was. It's not like the Bengals were going to trade Geno Atkins. So yeah, I don't know. Like, the Patriots don't have anybody. Like, I guess you could get Stephon Gilmore from the Patriots, but you'd have to clear out enough cap room. He's kind of underperforming. But I'm sure Zimmer could figure it out. Maybe, yeah, I guess Stephon Gilmore. I sound super enthusiastic about getting like a potential top 10 corner to play alongside top 5 corner Xavier Rhodes.
Yeah, it's like, again, not exactly an embarrassment of riches for the Vikings, but an embarrassment of comfort. And
yeah, exactly. It's another embarrassment of comfort situation.
Well, and who really is going to sell anything that we would want to buy? We're already deep enough at positions where other teams are willing to release players. So, Yeah. I guess, I'm always loath to do something like trade for a running back, but I don't know. The running backs are playing well enough. The receivers are doing fine. I know that the Vikings were evidently in on Josh Gordon, but they, no team was going to trade for him before he wasn't cleared, and then the decision to clear him got moved back a day after the trade deadline. Which, come on, and then he was cleared, and so yeah, maybe if the rights for Josh Gordon would have been interesting, but okay. It's like the Vikings have a really good top 2 set of receivers, and you're worried about, Stephon Diggs' ability to stay on the field. Fine. But it's not like that's where I would give up assets to shore up. So I guess my first thought would be 3 technique to make that defense just truly great. Then I'd go cornerback. Then I'd go maybe a guard. But see, the thing is, guard is kind of my first need in the draft because Joe Burrow is going to retire. You don't really need a guard now, and both tackles are playing really well. So yeah, I don't know. So a tight end. Who's giving up tight ends? Let's get one of those. So would you rather draft a guard, or would you rather find a veteran guard, or is the price of a veteran guard so high that it's just not worth considering?
I changed my mind. I'm just going to draft a guard. Because the whole point is that Joe Berger's going to retire, and you need someone to compete with Danny Isidora. That's the reason. So draft a guard early, maybe the first 2 rounds, who knows. Then draft a guard late to get depth. 2 guards in the draft. This is the draft show on Norse Code.
Well, it's a little early to start the draft prognostications. We've got like 2 whole months where we can do that. So we actually...
Yeah, and we don't have to think about the draft early because the Vikings are in the driver's seat. Woo, go Vikings.
Get it. I'm actually just going to cut that clip out, and we can just play it on repeat for like the entire draft season. Draft one early to play, and then draft another one for depth. That's all you need to know.
Boom, done.
Well, all right. That's going to do it for the long-awaited second half recap of the London game from Norse Code. That was
we can fill this time with some other London anecdotes. I know that. So we left earlier than you did. So you went on, it sounded like a Harry Potter tour, right? Like,
not really so it was a self-guided Harry Potter tour. The magic of the future. You can go on a guided Harry Potter tour, but just like everything touristy in London, except for the museums, it costs money. So we just downloaded the like Google Maps overlay and explored various shooting locations on our own. And, of course, went to platform 9 3/4 in King's Cross Station, which I was not prepared for all the emotions I felt when we were there, because it's kind of like, so it's hyper commercial, and I took a couple of pictures, and it was very difficult to crop all the people out of the pictures because there were literally 30 people waiting in line to take their picture with this stupid half a shopping cart.
It's okay. So a couple of years ago, when we went to the Louvre, my parents and I, one of the things we're going to do is we're going to go see the Mona Lisa, and it was just an incredibly, I'm not going to say deflating experience, but like, I don't know, myth-shattering experience because of the absurdity of having a sign right next to it. Please don't take pictures. Please no flash photography in particular. And then B, just this crowd of people around this really small painting. Like, that's kind of one of the first reactions people have to the Mona Lisa. It's a lot smaller than I thought. This crowd of people taking flash photos of the Mona Lisa. And it's just like, oh, yeah, this feels weird.
Yeah, it's impossible to have like a pensive moment with it and like really like reflect on anything other than just how like commercialized the experience is. Having said that, the 30 people that were waiting in line, I probably heard 6 different languages, not including English. And there were everything from like 8-year-old children to people our parents' age that were like super excited to get their picture taken. And they have a professional photographer, and they have a prop person. You can pick any of the house scarves to wear, and they have one of each wand. They have Harry and Ron and Hermione's and Dumbledore's wand, like right there. So you can have like a prop, and they'll the photographer gives a cue, and the prop person like throws the scarf up so it looks like you're flying into the wall. It's kind of cute until you realize they charge you 19 pounds for the photo once you're inside, but you're allowed to take your own photo if you want.
All right. Yeah, sure.
That has got to be the worst job in London, by the way. Just like standing there all day. But all these people were so excited, and it's hard. Like it's basically the Wailing Wall for young nerds, for bookish people. the opportunity to just be there for something that, I mean, it was. Yeah, you have your conception of how you think the platform will look in the books, and commercialism aside, it's nothing like that. But you're still like there, like that is the spot that J.K. Rowling was writing about, and it like as somebody who deeply identified with the like desire to actually be a wizard and be transported away from all these terrible Muggles, I get it, and I get the validity of the experience, and it was still really like kind of sweet to see all these, kids and adults kind of fulfill this this moment that they've all shared in their minds, and that billions of people have shared in our collective reading minds. Also, they sell some really fancy stuff in the gift shop. Like no matter how much money you have, the Harry Potter store will take it from you. But
I gotta go back to London then, huh?
Yeah, as soon as you can. I recommend the set of lacquered house pins. If I was a wealthy person, that's the thing I would have taken away. But yeah, so we just like toured some of the like Harry Potter like shooting spots, which many of them are just like extremely random. Like the entrance to the Leaky Cauldron is actually just like an optician's office, and it's just like a narrow door in this like covered Victorian market, and a bunch of the businessmen that were like walking by, like we were going by like as the markets were closing, and so a bunch of businessmen were somewhat miffed that they had to walk around us as we were like mooning for pictures in their space. The memorial to the Great Fire of London was one of my favorite things to see. We would have climbed the steps, but that cost money as well. Of course. But I love how that for 150 years they added an inscription at the end just to throw shade at the Pope.
That's so great.
They added it in the late 1600s and took it down in the mid 1800s. But there's references to it on the plaques now, so that you know that the establishmentarians not down with the papacy. And of course, there was Buckingham Palace, which is not as romantic as you would think, especially at night. There were lots of like the traffic makes it very not romantic, but so
yeah,
it
I
goes.
think I recall that from my last trip.
I threw 2 pence in the fountain and wished I could be British. I had so much fun there. I can't wait to go back.
So yeah,
I don't know. I think
to London.
Did we miss any other anecdotes? I don't know. I did have British food in London on the very or not British food, Indian food the very last night in London. The worst Indian food I've ever had.
Oh, friggin' shock! Sorry, I needed to. Hey, go on.
The saag paneer, or it wasn't saag paneer. It was the tomato one. It was like Chef Boyardee.
Oh Jesus!
The tomato sauce was just like super sweet. It was the only place we went the entire trip that did like full on table service, where you sit down and they take your order and they bring you food at the table and you pay at the table. Everywhere else we went, it was pub style service, where you just like walk up to the bar, ask for whatever you want, and tell them your table number, which is a genius system. Like they've got everything so much more efficient there. But this poor server clearly hated his life and knew that he was serving like substandard food. And it was just a bit of a sour taste in the mouth. I was looking forward to a nice plate of chicken tikka. The naan was excellent. The garlic naan was perfect. But that's about it. I don't know. It was a whirlwind trip. We weren't there for very long, but we had a fantastic time. And I think one thing that all 4 people in our party kind of agreed on as we were walking around is that just like everything in London, everything in the UK that we saw is positively adorable.
Yeah, it was quaint as hell.
Like aggressively quaint, like everywhere, like you can't escape it. Like everywhere you turn, you're just like, oh, this is amazing too. And I don't know.
No, I agree. I was telling some of the British sports writers there that like one of the things that would bother me if I started to live in London would be just how well, besides the network infrastructure. By the way, the mobile data, whatever in England and in London, just awful. Not just at the stadium where you expect it to be bad. There's limited bandwidth, like 80,000 people, fine. But like just throughout the city, I just thought the mobile network was just awful. It was terrible.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just because we were like expats, like using phones that were like piggybacking on other services. But yeah, the internet was hot garbage everywhere.
Yeah. But besides that, the other thing that would bother me is just how cute everything is. Just so adorable. Like after a while, I'd just be like, man, this doesn't need to be adorable. I just need to like go to work. And they're like, no, it's not adorable here at all. I'm like, you live here. It's different. Like you grew up in this.
It's like, well, then you're going to be in for a shock when you come to America and nothing is adorable by comparison.
Yeah, right. You think, why is everything ugly and big? And it's like, well, it's normal. I don't know what you're talking about. Right?
You come to Kansas City and you're just like, wow, this is much less pleasant. But you can say that
Where's your sense of history? We don't have history. We stomped it out.
Exactly. We stole your history and then we slashed and burned our way through what existed here and built our own. All right. And on that note, I think
that's a good way to end the show. Let's end it there.
I think that's a wrap. I think we're going to get too far into it. Anyway, if you ever have an opportunity to go to London and you've never been, take it. It's cheap now, and it's kind of fun to be the person that has the funny accent for once.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
living in a place where other people have funny accents.
You're always worried about like people like they're looking down on you because you're an American. I did not experience that once.
I had a lot of people ask me to repeat myself, but not like because I was saying I'm an American. Like it's not like they were incredulous or anything. It's just that my non-regional dialect threw them off, I think. But no, it was British people are frequently in a hurry and generally pretty reserved, so it's not like we had a whole lot of opportunities to like sit down and be interviewed by the locals. So recommend it to anyone. It's an amazing place. It's just foreign enough where you can still just totally get around and speak the language and no one will think you're